The alarms shrieked, a cacophony that clawed at Owen's already frayed nerves. Sand, fine as powdered glass, lashed against the outpost's reinforced windows, blurring the ochre landscape into a swirling vortex. The life support readings plummeted. He'd failed them before. He wouldn't fail them again. Not these people, his new family, a fragile cluster of humanity clinging to this hostile planet. Not after he'd lost his real family, swallowed by the sun's fiery wrath during the evacuation of Earth. He slammed his fist against the flickering console. The primary air purifiers were offline, clogged by the pervasive viridian sand. He needed xylem moss, a rare plant whose unique cellular structure filtered even the finest particles. It grew only in the sheltered canyons to the east, a treacherous journey in this storm. It's suicide, Owen, croaked Dr. Chen, clutching his throat, his face already tinged with cyanosis. There's no other way, Owen replied, his voice a strained whisper, guilt a bitter tang on his tongue. He strapped on his oxygen mask and environmental suit, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He stumbled out into the swirling sand, the outpost's emergency beacon his only guide. The wind tore at him, trying to rip him from his precarious foothold on the rocky terrain. Visibility was near zero. He pushed on, driven by a desperate hope and the gnawing spectre of his past failures. Then, a flicker of movement. A figure, tall and slender, silhouetted against the storm's fury. Iridescent green skin shimmered beneath the swirling dust. It was Naira, a verdant, one of the planet's indigenous people. He'd seen her a few times near the outpost, her large, black eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "You shouldn't be out here," she shouted, her voice barely audible above the wind's roar. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed a vibrant turquoise, the color of fear. "Xylem moss," he gasped, pointing eastward. "I need it." Naira hesitated, her gaze searching his face. He knew the verdant were wary of humans, resentful of the outpost's intrusion on their ancient lands. Then, with a nod that surprised him, she turned and gestured for him to follow. She moved with an uncanny grace through the storm, her feet seeming to barely touch the ground. She led him through a winding path, invisible to human eyes, to a sheltered canyon where the xylem moss clung to the rock face in vibrant green patches. "This is sacred ground," she said, her voice soft, laced with a reverence he understood despite the language barrier. "Take only what you need." As he gathered the moss, his fingers brushed against hers. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He looked up, startled, to find her watching him, her black eyes wide, reflecting the storm's turbulent energy. He felt a strange flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since before the evacuation. He pulled his hand away, flustered, and quickly finished gathering the moss. The journey back was a blur of wind and sand. Naira stayed close, her presence a strange comfort in the desolate landscape. When they finally reached the outpost, the airlock hissed open, welcoming them back into a world of flickering lights and struggling machinery. He turned to thank her, but she was gone, vanished into the swirling sands as if she were a phantom of the storm. He staggered towards the life support system, the xylem moss clutched tightly in his gloved hands. He had saved them, for now. But as he worked, he couldn't shake the image of Naira's face, her eyes filled with a mix of wariness and something else. Something that made his heart beat faster than the storm outside. Something that whispered of a connection deeper than the swirling sands of Viridia. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his life, and perhaps the fate of the outpost, had changed forever. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The xylem moss had worked its magic, and the outpost's air purifiers hummed steadily. Exhaustion gnawed at Owen, but he couldn't sleep. Naira's image, her vibrant green skin and luminous eyes, flickered behind his eyelids. He needed answers, and he had a feeling she held them. He found her the next day, sitting atop a dune overlooking the outpost, a solitary figure against the vast expanse of sand. She seemed to sense his approach and turned, her black eyes meeting his. He gestured towards the east, where the hazy outlines of ancient structures rose from the sands like the bones of forgotten giants. "Take me there," he said, his voice hoarse. Naira hesitated, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Those are the Whispering Ruins," she said, her voice a soft melody in the still air. "They hold the memories of my people." The ruins were a labyrinth of crumbling walls and eroded statues, half buried by the relentless sand. Naira led him through the maze, her hand brushing his occasionally in the narrow passages. Each touch sent a shiver down his spine, a strange mix of excitement and unease. He found himself hyper-aware of her proximity, of the subtle scent of ozone and desert flowers that clung to her skin. On the walls, murals depicted verdant figures intertwined with strange, glowing plants. Naira explained that the verdant had once lived in harmony with Viridia's ecosystem, drawing energy directly from the planet itself. "The corporation," she said, her voice laced with bitterness, "they came and took what was not theirs. They disrupted the balance, poisoned the land." Her words resonated with his own guilt. Humanity, too, had taken more than its share, ravaged Earth's ecosystems in its relentless pursuit of progress. He saw a reflection of his own past failures in Naira's pain. As they explored deeper into the ruins, a low hum filled the air. Naira led him to a chamber where a network of crystalline conduits pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. "This is the heart of Viridia," she whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "The source of our power." He reached out to touch the crystalline structure, but Naira stopped him, her hand gently covering his. "It is not for human hands," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "Not yet." He saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, a vulnerability that made his chest ache. He knew he had to earn her trust, to prove that not all humans were like the corporation. Back at the outpost, news from Earth had arrived. A glimmer of hope, the new terraforming project had shown promise. They might be able to return home someday. The news should have filled him with joy, but all he could think of was Naira, the Whispering Ruins, the fragile ecosystem they both fought to protect. He found her again by the dunes, gazing out at the setting sun. He told her about the news, about the possibility of returning to Earth. "Will you go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked into her eyes, the last rays of the sun painting her green skin with a golden hue. He thought of his lost family, of the guilt that had driven him for so long. Then he thought of Naira, of the connection they shared, of the future they could build together on this strange, beautiful planet. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I'm staying." He reached out and took her hand, his heart pounding in his chest. Her skin felt cool and smooth beneath his touch. For a moment, they stood in silence, the vast expanse of Viridian sand stretching out before them, a silent testament to the challenges and the possibilities that lay ahead. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with conflict and uncertainty. But for the first time since the evacuation, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of belonging he hadn't thought possible. He had found a new purpose, a new family, a new love, amidst the whispers of Viridian sands. The soft glow of the hydroponics lamps bathed the lab in an ethereal green light, illuminating the delicate leaves of the hybrid plant Owen had cultivated. It pulsed with a gentle luminescence, a visible manifestation of the energy it generated, a potent blend of Viridian and Earth flora. It was beautiful, and it held the key to the outpost's survival, maybe even to the restoration of Earth's ravaged ecosystems. But it also drew unwanted attention. He'd seen the corporation surveillance drones circling the outpost, their metallic bodies glinting like predatory insects in the afternoon sun. He knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He glanced over at Naira, who sat across from him, studying the intricate patterns of the plant's veins. She seemed oblivious to the impending danger, her focus entirely absorbed by the miracle of life unfolding before her. He wished he could share her serenity. "It's remarkable," she murmured, her voice a soft melody that eased the knot of anxiety in his chest. "This fusion of our worlds." He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he pointed to a particular cluster of cells. The contact, even through his gloves, sent a ripple of warmth through his arm. He hesitated, unsure how she would react. But she didn't flinch. Instead, her hand turned, her fingers intertwining with his. Her skin felt cool and smooth, a stark contrast to the rough texture of his gloves. He felt a tremor run through her hand, a subtle vibration that resonated with the quiet hum of the plant. It reminds me of the stories my grandmother used to tell," she whispered, her black eyes shimmering with a strange mixture of wonder and sadness. "Stories of a time when our people lived in harmony with Viridia, when the planet itself provided for all our needs." He squeezed her hand gently, wanting to offer comfort, but unsure if his gesture was appropriate. He still didn't fully understand verdant customs, their nuances of touch and expression. But in that shared silence, in the gentle pressure of her hand against his, he felt a connection that transcended words, a shared yearning for a better future. The lab door hissed open, shattering the quiet intimacy. Dr. Chen rushed in, his face pale, his voice strained. "Owen, the corporation, they're here. They're demanding access to your research." Naira's hand tightened around his, her eyes darkening with apprehension. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce desire to shield her from the ugliness of human greed. He knew he couldn't hide the plant, not anymore. The corporation had eyes everywhere. He had to make a choice. He looked at Naira, her face a mask of fear and uncertainty. He thought of the whispering ruins, of the ancient verdant technology, of the power it held. He thought of his own guilt, of his failed attempts to save his family on Earth. And he knew, with a sudden clarity, what he had to do. "I'll handle this," he said to Dr. Chen, his voice firm. He turned to Naira, his gaze meeting hers. "Trust me." He left the lab, his heart pounding in his chest. He met the corporation CEO, a ruthless woman with cold, calculating eyes, in the outpost's main hall. He knew he was outmatched, outgunned. But he also knew he had something they wanted, something they couldn't take by force. He offered them a deal, access to the hybrid plant's energy in exchange for their cooperation in restoring Viridia's ecosystem. He knew it was a gamble, a desperate attempt to buy time, to protect Naira and her people. The CEO's lips curled into a thin smile. "Interesting proposition, Dr. Thorne. But I'm afraid we have other plans." Just then, the outpost's alarms blared, a deafening cacophony. The emergency lights flickered, casting the hall in a strobing red glow. The corporation's security forces stormed in, their weapons drawn. They hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to take what they wanted by force. Chaos erupted. Owen dove for cover, the sounds of gunfire echoing around him. He had to get back to the lab, to Naira. He had to protect her. He fought his way through the pandemonium, his heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. He reached the lab, his breath ragged, his body aching. The door was ajar, the soft green light spilling out into the corridor. He burst in, his eyes scanning the room. Naira was gone. The acrid smell of smoke stung Owen's nostrils, a stark contrast to the sweet fragrance of the xylia moss still clinging to his suit. The corporation's attack had been swift and brutal, a calculated display of force designed to crush any resistance. He stumbled through the ruined corridors of the outpost, the emergency lights casting flickering shadows that danced like phantoms in the smoke-filled air. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. Naira. He had to find Naira. He reached the lab, his breath catching in his throat. The door was blasted off its hinges, the hydroponics lamps shattered, their emerald glow extinguished. The hybrid plant, once vibrant and pulsating with life, lay wilted and broken amidst the debris. A wave of despair washed over him, a chilling echo of the helplessness he'd felt watching his family consumed by the solar flare. Then, he saw her. Naira stood in the center of the room, her back to him, her slender frame trembling. Her bioluminescent markings pulsed a frantic violet, the color of grief and rage. He rushed towards her, his hand outstretched. "Naira!" She turned, her black eyes blazing with an intensity he'd never seen before. He stopped, his hand hovering in the air between them. He'd never seen her like this, her usual serenity replaced by a raw, untamed power. They destroyed it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "They destroyed everything." He reached out again, this time touching her arm gently. Her skin felt strangely warm beneath his gloved hand. He hesitated, fearing his touch might be unwelcome, even harmful. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her body shaking with silent sobs. He held her close, his own grief mingling with hers, the warmth of her body a strange comfort amidst the cold, metallic scent of destruction. "They won't get away with this," she said, her voice hardening with a resolve that sent a shiver down his spine. Her eyes, still brimming with tears, now burned with a fierce determination. "I won't let them." He felt a surge of admiration, a spark of hope igniting in the ashes of despair. He knew, in that moment, that she wasn't just a victim, a passive observer of humanity's greed. She was a force to be reckoned with, a guardian of her planet, her people, and their shared future. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She looked at him, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. "I'm going to show them the true power of Viridia," she said, her voice echoing with the ancient whispers of the ruins. "A power they can't control, a power they can't destroy." She moved with a sudden swiftness, her movements fluid and graceful, like a desert wind swirling through the ruined lab. She retrieved a small, crystalline device from a hidden compartment beneath the floor. It pulsed with the same ethereal light he'd seen in the whispering ruins, a light that seemed to resonate with the very essence of the planet. "This is a key," she explained, her voice low and urgent. "A key to the heart of Viridia. It can heal or destroy." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "I need you to trust me, Owen. I need you to believe in me." He looked into her eyes, the intensity of her gaze burning into his soul. He thought of his promise to stay, to help her protect her world. He thought of the fragile hope of a shared future, a future where humanity and the Verdant could coexist in harmony. And he knew, with a certainty that transcended logic and reason, that he had to trust her, even if it meant risking everything. "I do," he said, his voice firm. "I trust you." Naira nodded, a flicker of gratitude softening the fierce determination in her eyes. She turned and walked towards the shattered remains of the lab's main console. She began to input a series of complex commands, her fingers moving with a practiced ease that belied the urgency of the situation. The crystalline device in her hand pulsed with a growing intensity, the ethereal light spreading outwards, bathing the ruined lab in a soft, otherworldly glow. "I'm going to send a message to the corporation," she said, her voice echoing with a strange, otherworldly resonance. "A message they won't ignore." He watched her, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of awe and fear swirling within him. He knew she was taking a tremendous risk, a risk that could cost her everything. He wanted to stop her, to protect her from the corporation's wrath. But he also knew that he couldn't. This was her fight, her world, her destiny. And all he could do was stand by her side and pray that she succeeded. The crystalline device pulsed in Naira's hand, bathing the ruined lab in an eerie glow. The air crackled with an energy that made the hair on Owen's arms stand on end. He watched, mesmerized, as she sent her message, a surge of energy that pulsed outwards, towards the corporation's orbiting command ship. He didn't understand the technology, the ancient verdant science that seemed to manipulate the very fabric of the planet itself. But he understood the desperation in her eyes, the fierce determination to protect her world, her people. He saw a reflection of his own guilt, his own failed attempts to save those he loved, in the depths of her pain. The response was immediate and brutal. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the corporation ship unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, targeting the whispering ruins, the heart of Viridian power. Naira cried out, a sound of anguish that ripped through Owen's heart. The crystalline device flickered, its light dimming, the connection to the planet's power weakening. "They're trying to sever the connection," she gasped, her body shaking with the strain. "They're trying to silence Viridia." Owen knew they had to act, and fast. He grabbed his comm unit, his hand shaking. He sent out a distress call, a desperate plea for help, to anyone who might be listening. He knew it was a long shot, a gamble against impossible odds. But he had to try. He had to do something, anything, to help her, to protect the fragile hope they'd built together amidst the chaos. His message was intercepted by a small fleet of independent traders, sympathetic to the verdant cause. They engaged the corporation's ship, buying precious time for Naira to complete her work. The lab shook violently as the battle raged above them, the sounds of explosions echoing through the ruined outpost. Naira's face was contorted with effort, beads of sweat glistening on her brow. The crystalline device pulsed erratically, the connection to the planet flickering in and out. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, wanting to offer comfort, support, but afraid to break her concentration. He'd never felt so helpless, so acutely aware of his own limitations, his inability to protect her from the forces aligned against them. He saw the doubt flicker in her eyes, the fear that she might fail, that she might not be strong enough. He made a decision, a reckless, impulsive decision driven by a desperate need to reassure her, to show her that he believed in her, that he was with her, no matter what. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His touch was tentative, hesitant, unsure if his human biology might harm her delicate verdant skin. But she didn't flinch. Instead, her hand tightened around his, her grip surprisingly strong. The connection between them, physical and emotional, seemed to strengthen the link between the crystalline device and the planet's power. The ethereal glow intensified, spreading outwards, enveloping them both in a warm, protective embrace. A wave of energy pulsed outwards, radiating from the whispering ruins, a silent roar that shook the very foundations of Viridia. The corporation ship faltered, its weapon systems flickering and dying. The attack ceased. Naira collapsed against him, her body weak, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He held her close, his arms wrapped around her slender frame, the warmth of her body a stark contrast to the cold, metallic scent of destruction that filled the air. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent of ozone and desert flowers, a scent that had become synonymous with hope, with home. In that moment, amidst the ruins of their shared world, they found solace in each other's arms, a quiet refuge in the heart of the galactic storm. The aftermath of the battle was a blur of activity. The independent traders, their ships battered but victorious, landed near the outpost. They offered assistance, supplies, and a promise of protection. The verdant people, emboldened by Naira's courage, emerged from their hidden settlements, ready to rebuild, to reclaim their world. Owen watched, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and gratitude, as Naira addressed her people, her voice ringing with a newfound confidence, a fierce determination to forge a new future for Viridia, a future where humans and verdant could coexist in peace. He knew he should be rejoicing, celebrating their victory. But a deep unease gnawed at him. He'd received a message from Earth. The terraforming project had been successful. They were ready for him to return, to help rebuild their ravaged world, to finally put his past failures to rest. He had a choice to make, a choice that tore at his heart, a choice between the world he'd lost and the world he'd found, between the guilt that haunted him and the love that had blossomed amidst the whispers of Viridian sands. He found Naira by the dunes, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. He told her about the message, about the chance to return home. He expected relief, joy, perhaps even a hint of encouragement. But her face remained impassive, her black eyes reflecting the turbulent emotion swirling within him. "Will you go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, the last rays of the sun illuminating her face, highlighting the delicate lines of her features, the subtle shimmer of her green skin. He thought of his lost family, of the guilt that had driven him for so long. He thought of Naira, of the connection they shared, of the future they could build together on this strange, beautiful planet. And he knew, with a certainty that surprised even him, that he couldn't leave. "No," he said, his voice firm, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm staying." A flicker of something crossed her face, something he couldn't quite decipher. Relief? Gratitude? Or perhaps, fear? He knew their path wouldn't be easy. They would face challenges, obstacles, opposition from both their peoples. The whispers of the past, the echoes of their shared trauma, would continue to haunt them. But in that moment, standing hand in hand beneath the vast expanse of the Viridian sky, they were together, united by a love that had blossomed amidst the chaos, a love that offered a fragile hope for a new beginning, a new era of understanding and cooperation, a future where the whispers of the sands might finally speak of peace.